Wednesday, May 4th, 2016, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, well, then there was one. Donald Trump's win in Indiana marks what looks like the end for both Ted Cruz and for Kasich. Presidential run. We're going to see and take a look at last night's developments in that run for the White House. Videos of actors and comedians reading mean tweets are nothing new, but there's one going viral of men reading mean tweets to female sports journalists, and it's more than mean. What we're going to see there is pretty vile. And Arianna Huffington, she's now got a seat on the Uber board of directors. Normally, that might be a big deal, maybe not, but when the Huffington Post publishes stories about the ride-sharing service daily, well, just how big is that conflict of interest? And there's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but we're going to start with the many notable storylines to come out of Saturday's White House Correspondents' dinner. It's the annual event dubbed Nerd Prom, in which journalists, celebrities, and politicians rub shoulders for just one night. President Obama made his mark, poking fun at reporters and even at the candidates looking to take his place. And right after that now famous mic drop, he turned it over to host Larry Wilmore.
And I have to admit, it's not easy to follow the president, man. You got some jokes, Mr. President. President's funny. Stay in your lane, man. It's not, you don't see me going around presidenting all the time, right? I don't go around passing health care and signing executive orders, pardoning turkeys, and not closing Guantanamo. Oh, wait, maybe I did do that. But I have to say, it's great. It looks like you're really enjoying your last year of the presidency. Saw you hanging out with NBA players like Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors. That was cool. That was cool, yeah. You know, it kind of makes sense, too, because both of you like raining down bombs on people from long distances, right? That's true. What? Am I wrong? What? Speaking of drones, how is Wolf Blitzer still on television? Ask a follow-up question. Good. Hey, Wolf, I'm ready to project tonight's winner. Anyone that isn't watching the Situation Room. Oh,
Well, that was an awkward moment there. Every year we talk about this dinner and talk about how uncomfortable it can be. And to think about how journalists spend the night hobnobbing with those they're supposed to cover, how for one night everyone pretends to be friends, to eat and drink and party together, ignoring that this administration has been among the least transparent and the least friendly to journalists, and that the amount of scholarship money that's awarded shrinks year after year.
Larry Wilmore wasn't playing to anybody sitting on the stage.
That's right.
He wasn't playing to that room.
Right.
Larry Wilmore hosts a show that is part of a legacy that has held the media accountable, and that is why the show was created. He called people out by name because you want to know what? People that watch The Daily Show, people that watch Larry Wilmore, people that watch Colbert see flaws in our journalism, and they see flaws in those people.
So that was Liz Winstead. She's one of the creators of The Daily Show, and her whole point is that Larry Wilmore was actually making a bit more of a commentary about the state of the press in that routine the other night.
I mean, actually, not only did Wilmore make some pretty pointed comments about the press, and a few times, I think maybe a little unfair, the personal jabs at Wolf Blitzer, but
or Don Lemon or some others.
Don Lemon at least gave him the finger and was smiling when the joke came. But the president made some pretty pointed remarks about the press too that we don't want to forget. But you know, I think this event, I watch it, so okay, I admit the guilt there, but I also hate it for some of the reasons you pointed out, but mostly because, as we say this, I think every year, this just shows you how far apart the journalists in Washington are from the people that they're supposedly serving, the public. Their lives and this event have nothing to do with the kinds of stories that they should be telling or the life experiences that might help them relate to audiences. And maybe that says something about why journalism's in the state that it's in right now.
I mean, I agree with you. To me, and I've watched it, now I've gotten to the point where I just sort of watch the highlights.
But I really do have a problem with the whole hobnobbing. I mean, now you've got sort of this red carpet kind of vibe that goes on at the beginning, and you know, people basically showing up in attire that is way above their means, because a lot of the people who go to this event, they don't make the kind of money to be wearing what they're wearing, so they're just sort of modeling clothing for someone else. But the issues that they aren't talking about is what bothers me. They aren't talking about inequality. They aren't talking about the state of our politics right now, where we actually have a reality show billionaire who is going to be the Republican presidential nominee.
For
I
the
mean,
GOP.
those are things that need to be discussed. But in this whole facade of hey, we're getting along for this one night because tomorrow we're going to go back and be at each other's throats. I mean, I have real issues with that.
I mean, it even looks now on CNN, as much as I kind of defended Wolf Blitzer from the attack there, it's almost like on CNN, you're watching E! Before and after the Oscars. I mean, James Warren talked about this in a piece you got on our Links blog, but they had a pre-show and an after show, and they covered the after parties, and it was just ridiculous.
And that's the thing that I don't understand. It's almost like it's the celebrity journalist that we've talked about on this program over and over again. Where does the celebrity stop and the journalist start, or vice versa? Because right now we're not getting the kind of coverage out of Washington, D.C. that we desperately need to have. And this sort of epitomizes the problem that we have with the Washington press corps right now.
And for a lot of people, getting an invitation to the White House Correspondents' Dinner was kind of like the journalist bucket list type of a thing. Like everybody wanted to be able to go at least once, and you're really not seeing that anymore. That
you're seeing the same old people.
Right. I'm saying
again.
The journalists that maybe we've worked with, or even some that we've taught, looking at going, yeah, I don't care. If I go, I go. If I don't go, my life's okay for it.
And I'm not wanting to let the journalists off the hook at all, but could I put the public on the hook just a little tiny bit? Because, you know, we talk about celebrity journalism. You know, the kind of news that always works, especially online these days, anything having to do with celebrities. We're celebrity obsessed, so let's give them more is probably the feeling at CNN and everybody else that provides coverage of this. But can we come back a little bit, too, to what the president had to say about the media? Because I think his writers, frankly, were better than Larry Wilmore's, and he delivered this stuff better, but he had some really...
There were some zingers in there.
And I think they were well-deserved zingers. I mean, he said something like, I think we can agree from the start that Trump has gotten the appropriate amount of coverage befitting the seriousness of his candidacy. Ha ha, I hope you all are proud of yourselves. That's a pretty cutting remark from the president, and it is spot on.
But I think it's accurate. I think it is accurate. I mean, we all sat around this table, 10 months ago, 16 months ago, talking about Donald Trump and his candidacy and how we thought that he wasn't going to get there, and now he's
foolish.
He's the presumptive candidate. I think his line, as funny as it was, also spoke to the accuracy of the ineptitude of the coverage of the media.
And the irony that
campaign.
the one time he could have gotten in front of cameras was the one time he didn't show up and he didn't want to be around anymore.
There was another joke at the expense of the press that the president told that I thought was really telling too. He recognized the actors from the movie Spotlight, right, which was based on the Boston Globe's coverage of the Catholic Church and the priest pedophiles. Well, he said, as you know, Spotlight is a film, a movie about investigative journalists with the resources and the autonomy to chase down the truth and hold the powerful accountable. Best fantasy film since Star Wars. And I thought that was a pretty deep jab, too, because there is a lot of good investigative journalism, but a lot less and a lot fewer and far fewer resources to do it today than before.
And it's not distributed in a way that actually reaches the public in a way that can impact their lives, so that they can see it and say, hey, wait a minute, this is something we need to really address. I mean, there is a lot of good investigative journalism being done out there, but people aren't seeing it in a way that they could actually connect with in their daily lives.
Yeah, I'm thinking, the last real big story that I can remember that did that for me at least was the New York Times nail salon story, where that really came forward and created change in people's minds.
I mean, I think one of the other stories is the Flint, Michigan water crisis story, that now people in local communities are asking questions about how much lead is in our water. I mean, those types of stories are out there and they're being done, but they're not being done consistently.
I also thought, the president talked about a broader societal problem that we talk about on this show sometimes, but he was basically talking about the Republican primary and having fun at Trump's and the Republicans' expense. But he was saying, hey, the choices are fish or beef. Maybe that's not what you want, Republicans, but that's what you're going to get. You have choices between, then it was Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, not so much anymore. But it also talks about just the division, and we're getting, the chickens are coming home to roost. We as a society are getting what we asked for.
I mean, you could say the same thing about what's happening in the Democratic Party right now. I mean, you have those who are on Hillary's side and those who are on Bernie Sanders' side, and they're having to make a choice. I mean, yes, she's the presumptive Democratic presidential candidate, but there's still a huge number of Bernie Sanders supporters out there who are trying to figure out.
We saw that last night with Indiana.
Exactly.
And I don't know that people were expecting that to happen. There was one other thing before we move on to talk a little bit more about what happened last night. There was one other aspect of the White House Correspondents' Dinner that, like any good prom, if we're going to go with that nerd prom thing, like any high school dance, there was also a bit of melee that went on there, an actual fist fight that broke out between a reporter from the Huffington Post and from Fox News.
It was really weird, and probably it's not worth going into all the background, but essentially the Fox News reporter used to be that guy that was the producer for Bill O'Reilly who would ambush people, and so apparently he ambushed somebody who was a colleague of this Huffington Post reporter. He pulls out his cell phone and starts taking video of the Fox News reporter without his permission, scuffle over the phone, fists are thrown, and it's silliness.
Yeah, I think it was at an after party, right?
Right,
Yeah.
at an after party.
Again, an after party.
Right.
For
There's an
Correspondents' Dinner.
Right. Okay. Well, we talked about how Donald Trump was the butt of a lot of those jokes Saturday night, but today it's Donald Trump that's getting the last laugh as he wins Indiana last night and now appears to be the only man standing on the Republican side of this. One of the things that came out yesterday that just seems outrageous, and Savannah Guthrie asked Donald Trump about this morning on the Today Show, this connection that Ted Cruz's father was related to the Kennedy assassination.
I'm still trying to figure that out. I've been reading blogs
Since last night, trying to figure this out.
Since last, I mean, I heard about it this morning, and I kept going, how did that come up, and where are the facts behind it, and why is it relevant?
2 and 2 now equals 6.
Well, yeah, and Trump's will.
So Trump's father, a minister, was in Indiana campaigning heavily, trying to pull it out for his son. But
Cruz's father.
I mean, Cruz's,
Yeah.
sorry. But the story was about, or that Trump was, trying to validate, was that apparently Cruz's dad allegedly was handing out, pro-Castro flyers, as was Lee Harvey Oswald, and somehow that was a connection. What that has to do with the presidential campaign,
I wish our
have
radio
no
listeners
idea.
could see the look on Ernest's face right now.
Except, I will say, not about that particular story, but I will say this. We in the media, maybe that Washington Correspondents' Dinner is pretty emblematic of it, the political class in Washington, everybody got Donald Trump wrong not because they didn't think Donald Trump could be president, but we did not see the hurt and the despair and the anger on a part of a lot of people because of income inequality and other problems that are out there. Bernie Sanders is tapping it on one side, Trump was tapping it on another, and that, as much as anything, is probably why Trump's going to get this nomination, and none of us saw it.
I mean, to me, it was one of those things that we focus in, and we talk about this all the time. We focus in on the candidates, but we don't focus in on the electorate, and we don't focus in on the people who are actually the ones going and marking their ballots and putting it into the box. And now that we want to sort of shift and focus in on that, we can't do it because we really haven't taken the time to try to understand it. And what we also haven't understood is the deep divide between the electorate and the establishment. And the Republicans have been burned on that. That's Trump all the way around. And I think the Democrats need to be paying attention to that because their presumptive standard bearer does not have the full support of the electorate on the Democratic side.
The thing that worries me is that rather than now turning our focus on those issues that might distinguish probably Hillary Clinton and probably Donald Trump, is the fact that we'll really spend more time talking about how down in the gutter this campaign is going to get.
Yeah.
Which, let's actually kind of get to that, and is part of the next thing I wanted to talk about. There's actually a line in my favorite episode of The West Wing in which political strategist Bruno Gianelli says he loves it when the women get involved, meaning the candidates' wives. His tone is sarcastic because it means that there's been a distraction keeping people from talking about the real issues. Well, GQ's profile of Melania Trump got the women involved. There are a lot of things that are in this piece, a lot of people, Melania Trump chief among them, are not happy about.
I read it, and frankly, so first of all, let's just say, it's Gentleman's Quarterly. Are you surprised at that kind of tone? Now, I'm surprised maybe that a woman wrote the story. I'm not surprised that the GQ editors probably had a little something to do with the take on it.
Even Maxim, again, another gentleman's magazine, called it a hit job.
Yeah, but that was just an attempt to try to get a little bit of mention in social media on a big story. But this story, if you read it, I mean, it is sexist, it is classist. I mean, there's lots of problems with that story. Now, that doesn't mean you can't focus on Melania Trump and her upbringing as a supermodel and all of that, but dragging her family into it from,
her friends.
It just seemed to me like it was a hit job, and I don't see any reason not to call it that.
I mean, I read it. I think it's a hit job. They didn't ask depth questions. It was almost as if they went in with an idea of the type of story they wanted, and they asked her questions which would generate the type of responses that would pretty much play into the narrative that they wanted to create. And to me, that's the definition of a hit job. And I think that's exactly what they did. Now, Trump and his people are pushing back. You have his supporters who are pushing back, and I think they have ample fuel to do it with because of the way the story was written. But this also goes to the whole thing that you're talking about, Mike, which is the media is focused in on the trivial and not on the substantive.
I think the other thing that's disturbing, I would expect Trump's people to push back. That's how politics is played. What I don't like is the fringe element of Trump supporters who are basically, they're posting, images of the Holocaust
and photoshopped images of her in a prisoner photo at Auschwitz,
right,
or being shot point blank in a concentration camp.
Which, unfortunately, as we're going to talk about, is just too common these days with the kind of comments that are leveled against women online, no matter what their status.
Well, and I think a lot of this has been brought out by the campaign. And I've read, and we also have an article on our Links blog that talks about this, is the fact that the media should have been hitting on this sort of fringe element that has sort of permeated Donald Trump's campaign and is now an integral part of what the Republicans are having to deal with. The media should have been hitting at this from day one and exposing this for what it is.
Well, and interestingly enough, it did way too late. We were looking in mid to late March at some of those protests that turned violent at different appearances, but it still has kind of quieted down.
I mean, but it was there. I mean, even before it turned violent, you could see it in the comment postings, and you can see it.
I'm talking about the coverage of the fringe elements. That bubbled up as we saw some of the violence at different events, and then that coverage also backed right down. Well, I wish I could say that what the GQ writer is experiencing is unique, but it's not. It's not even close. And Chicago Sportswriters Julie DeCaro and Sarah Spain wanted everyone to see just how bad it can get. They teamed up with a production crew from a site called Just Not Sports to show just how hurtful those comments can be. We're going to play a snippet of it, but before we do, I'm going to suggest if you've got kids around, you might want to consider turning down your radio or your TV for the next minute or so.
All right, you ready to do some mean tweets?
I'm ready.
Sarah Spain sounds like a nagging wife on TV today.
Not even married yet.
Julie DeCaro is a run-of-the-mill, mediocre beat writer.
Not atrocious, not good.
Just sorta there.
I'm actually not a beat writer at all, but okay.
Sarah Spain is just a scrub muffin? I don't even know what a scrub muffin is.
I don't either.
I love muffins.
One of the players should beat you to death with their hockey stick.
Like the where you are.
I'm just reading this.
Okay.
That was one of the tamer parts. It's a painful 4 minutes and 15 seconds to watch at some point, saying that somebody wished that one of the women would be raped again based on the work they do on the radio or online.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of, I'm not a fan at all of the government or any law enforcement entity snooping into anyone's privacy. But after watching this, I could sort of go along with law enforcement or someone finding these anonymous social media users and figuring out some sort of way to prosecute them, because what they're doing is, as far as I'm concerned, assault. It is verbal assault. They're doing it online, and it still should be punishable, because this is the type of violence that sort of permeates the underbelly of our society. And for these women who are doing a fantastic job and are breaking down barriers that should have been broken down years ago, for them to have to put up with this is just unconscionable.
And, you know, there's maybe one tiny little shining light coming out of that whole video. Well, one, people are going to see it and hope they're going to react to it in the way that they should. But these men who were asked to come in and read these tweets, it wasn't their tweets, to these reporters, a couple of them almost broke down and cried. I don't want to read this stuff. This is awful that you would say something like this to anyone. And the unfortunate part of it is that it happens all the time. It's not just to Melania Trump. It's not, or the reporter. It's not to sports journalists. We had a story, a week or so ago, The Guardian did a study of like 70 million comments.
Every comment since The Guardian introduced them.
All these comments, and they looked to see who had the most attacks on the reporters. Top 10. 8 were women, 2 were black men. Gee, what a big surprise that is.
And one of those black men is also gay.
Yeah. So I wish I could say there was something you could do about it. I mean, I get what Ernest is saying about maybe we need to go after these people, but it is anonymous. It is quote,
but even when it's
speech.
anonymous, I mean, look at some of the things we've even seen in terms of what's happened here on our own campus at the University of Missouri over the course of the last year, when people would make threats on Yik Yak, which is anonymous. So Twitter, there is still some kind of a breadcrumbs left behind, and that there's a handle and that there's some communication there. Yik Yak, which is supposedly anonymous, with a subpoena, you can go find that person. We've seen people arrested, charged, and even plead guilty.
And I'm not against that, but I think that it's still a drop in the bucket, because there's just so much of this misogyny out there, violent threats of violence, especially toward women. And I don't know what we in the media can do about it. I mean, the one reaction is just take down comments. Don't allow any of that on our sites. And that way we don't have to condone this kind of stuff, and we don't have to police it. But on the other hand, I mean, having a robust conversation about topics in the news is actually one of the things that theoretically, at least the internet has enabled, and it's a way to engage with readers and be more relevant to them than we've ever been. So I don't want to say just turn off comments, ignore the negative tweets or whatever, but I don't know what you can replace that with as a strategy.
I think part of the problem with keeping comments on or turning comments off is that, when you have a large number of people, or a significant number of people, who are doing these comments over and over and over again, they turn others off, and those who are more rational decide they're not going to engage, so you don't see those comments.
They bully the people who have something meaningful to contribute out of that conversation. Right. One of the thoughts I had is this was passed pretty widely in journalism and media circles in the last week or so, is that it's kind of in an echo chamber. We know this is an issue. We know how bad it is. It was preaching to the choir. I have to hope that it's making it out into the sports radio fandom circles, into the general public, because otherwise we're just talking to ourselves.
I think one of the ways that can happen is that sports journalism in and of itself is going to have to push this out to make sure that the fans who are reading them, the fans who are listening to them, also understand that this is not right and it must be stopped.
Well, we had one of my students actually was telling me that she asked John Walsh about this when he was on campus last week. John Walsh, one of the godfathers, one of the architects of ESPN, and she said she walked away a little disappointed from his response, that he knew about the video, but said that she told me, so I'm hearing this secondhand, but that he kind of said he didn't think it was as bad as maybe what was going on here.
Well, that you can say that when you're not confronting it on a daily basis.
If we don't solve it, what's going to happen is people are going to increasingly retreat to safer spaces. You see that with women on Facebook. I mean, there's
We've
research
been doing
that's showing
research
that, right?
I've actually been involved with
Yeah.
the New York Times and another project here on campus with RJI.
But if we do that, if we retreat to our safe places, then we don't have that conversation that we need to, to keep a civil discourse going.
Okay, well, Arianna Huffington, she's been pretty busy lately. When she's not actively running the Huffington Post, she's hawking her new book, The Sleep Revolution, Transforming Your Life One Night at a Time. And she's helping drive things at Uber.
What I love about Uber is that you are really transforming not just transportation, but cities. And that to me means a lot.
She is a member now of the Ride Sharing Services Board of Directors, and that's leading to a lot of chatter about conflict of interest, given that Huffington Post publishes stories, almost always positive ones, about once a day. What would you say? Business interests coming into play here?
I think business interests are coming into play. I think she has always sort of been a trendsetter, and now she's trying to set another trend in that you can be a news director or a news editor and also be engaged in the business side in a way that has a direct impact on what you're doing in the newsroom, and that's a dangerous line to cross. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. She's getting a lot of criticism and a lot of blowback about this decision.
Eric Wemple at the Washington Post kind of taking this on as his own cause.
Well, and because he apparently has found a story that was pitched to the Huffington Post by a reporter that was spiked, killed, because it would have made Uber look bad, and the editor allegedly said it was because of the relationship between the Huffington Post and Uber. That's a direct conflict of interest. But you've also got this problem that Arianna Huffington is a celebrity, not just an editor-in-chief. She's on a book tour, sponsored in part by Uber, and there's lots of other connections that are not normally there between a newsroom and a corporation.
Okay. Quickly, before we go today, I want to give the floor to Mike just for a minute or two. The Reynolds Journalism Institute has named its 10th class of fellows who are going to be coming in the fall. And in naming them, it kind of shows what some of those priorities are for the Institute in terms of the future of journalism and what types of things we're going to be looking at this year.
So I won't go into all of them or any of them in any detail, but go to our links blog and you can find a link there. But a couple of projects I think are really noteworthy. So we're working with 14 Medio from Cuba, a startup that's trying to get news into Cuba through various low bandwidth technologies. That's interesting. We're helping Politico launch a presidential promises tracker, which I think is kind of interesting. We're helping an Ohio University professor put together an accelerator for startups that are funded or founded by minority folks in the media, and we're also doing assisting on developing an ethics handbook for using virtual reality in journalism. All those things I think are really interesting.
Yeah, I'm especially interested in that virtual reality ethics handbook. That music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. Read more about each of the topics that we talked about today on our links blog. You'll find that under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again. Leave us comments, questions, see a preview of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show. Maya Jackson is our technical director, and Pat Akers ran our audio. Chelsea Vaughn is our associate producer. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're with you for another edition of Views of the News.